Welcome back to the Wolf of Property and Casualty. I'm your host, Derek Lasniak, with over 15 years of commercial broking experience focused on the middle market, upper middle market, and national account space. Topic for today's episode is called Stop Fucking Up Your Cope Information. And I was guilty of this throughout my career because once you start getting into being an insurance broker, there are certain things that become very routine about information collection. And I want to talk a little bit about cope information because I was never an underwriter before I was a broker. I always thought it'd be really interesting if I could take job shadowing. I always thought, like, why haven't Travelers or West Bend come up with for season, not taking our wet behind the ears young kids fresh out of school and sending them to a carrier. But like after I was 8 years in and had an established career, I would have loved to say like twice a month gone to an insurance carrier and not just understood how they underwrite, but I want to sit and watch my underwriter. I want to know how many different screens he toggles through. I want to know what he's looking at, what he's not looking at, what's automated, what's not. But anyway, cope information is one of those routine fundamental things that is the responsibility of a broker to submit. And when I say cope information, I'm talking about construction type, occupancy, protection, and exposure. And a lot of people, we're going to gather that in a tab on a spreadsheet, the dreaded renewal packet where we try to collect as much renewal information. Hopefully AI is doing the most work on that tedious process. I'm sure it is. But I'm not here to talk about how AI can make your cope information look a little bit better. What I'm here to talk about is what you should actually have in it. Maybe you're reading it wrong, and what I did or what I would do differently to make my life easier. And I got a couple stories along the way. So I'm going to go through these one by one, and I'm going to start with construction categories. All right. So for you brokers out there, for buyers and underwriters, construction category is not just whatever you think it is. And I'm not a contractor, I'm not a builder, so I don't really know that much about construction. But luckily, ISO, the leading authority on this, has already put together categories for you. There is really no need to not know what the construction type is. A lot of times you can eyeball this. It might be something that you gather along the way. And for all of these components that I'm going to talk about, let me tell you something for brokers out there. You look like a dipshit when 4 years in, you're asking a client, hey, on that one building that I've been to in person that we've insured for the last 5 years, would you call that non-combustible? That it makes you look like an idiot, like you don't know what's going on, especially when it's something you could have figured out. So the first thing about construction type is every time we're doing cope information, we are trying to make the underwriter's job easier. That means we want to speak their language. Underwriters in the property insurance market are working off ISO. So if we want to speak the underwriter's language, let's use the underwriter's categories. Let's not make it up. Let's not put concrete brick. Let's not leave it to any guessing because the rating platforms to which the rate is devised is going to be based on categories. And don't make them guess what you put in a document or a spreadsheet to then apply it. So the ISO has 6 categories: frame, which is pretty much like your residential house; joisted masonry, which has masonry walls; non-combustible, masonry non-combustible; modified fire resistive, and fire resistive. Yes, there is a difference between masonry non-combustible and non-combustible, and one is better than the other. Sometimes I think I would just choose the one that I thought was better. Same with fire resistive and modified fire resistive. So invest a little time, use some of these AI tools, and figure out what the difference is. What I used to do, and I never invested the time and probably still haven't to this day. What I used to do is I used to just Google Earth these and look from a street view and try to figure it out. It's pretty obvious what's frame and what's tilt up concrete. A lot of commercial buildings are made with tilt up concrete, but not all of your clients' buildings are new. Some of them have add-ons. What if the addition is tilt up concrete, but the original is frame? How are you differentiating that? What's the blended of frame and modified fire resistive? So don't leave it till the end. When you have a new customer, or even what I would do if you're listening to this and saying, shit, my cope information sucks, and say, launch a project. Mr. Customer, as a part of our annual ongoing dedication to the quality of our data, we're doing a quick cope check. I'd like to maybe spend 10 minutes with you just to talk through this and make sure nothing's changed or we don't have any bad information. If you tee it up as something that you're going to be doing to increase the accuracy of your data, then it doesn't look like you've just been asleep at the wheel for the last 5 years. The next thing I would do, once I have the right language, the ISO construction categories, the next thing I would do is make sure you have a good year built. I mean, I worked with cheese manufacturers that were in 100-year-old buildings. I worked with a lot of clients who added on to their buildings. There might be 5 different year built dates. You can't just pick one. You never know if an underwriter says that, well, the year built of the original structure was 1942, but they've added on 3 times in the last 20 years. That year built has a big influence on what goes into the rating. And you're not going to know what every carrier values each rating at. So try to be accurate. And that's one thing that a customer is going to know. That is one thing that a customer will know. Yeah, we added on here, here, and here. I've seen other brokers who have been so far as to go and look up permits within the jurisdiction, and they can find when permits were pulled to know what was done. That's another way to do it. And it shows a lot of extra effort. Maybe that's something AI can help with. I would take, if I was building into my comp information, I would go get a good, clean Google Street View picture of every building I wanted insured, and I would insert it into my spreadsheet so that the underwriter can then say, look all the way across your cope information and then get a visual. Our minds work better when we can visualize it. If I'm telling you it's a really nice building from 2014 with masonry non-combustible, what's better than a picture from Street View showing that it is what I say? Brokers, there's a lot of liars out there. There's a lot of people. Heck, I have fudged these because I didn't know in an effort to complete my submission. So you might as well go get the picture because you're going to save the underwriter the step. Next is building construction. Whether you include it here or you include it on occupancy, you're under a rock if you don't think what your roof looks like matters. I took a class on roofs. Last year when I was still working, or 2 years ago, we brought in a commercial roofing contractor for our manufacturing group, and they went through an hour presentation on what goes into the different types of roof. The flat ones that have the stone on top, what they're doing now for wind resistance, what's the lifeblood of a roof, how often should roofs be maintained. Educate yourself on roofs because especially here in the Midwest where hail and wind are going to be the major problem moving forward, the more you know about a roof, the better. I had a large client in the warehousing business that's paid particular attention with the roofs. And when you have a 200,000 square foot roof, you don't replace it every 10 years. You fix it in sections because it's wildly expensive. So if you have a huge footprint for whatever business you're working with, ask your client, hey, is it possible that I don't need you. I just want a half an hour with your roofing guy. I just want to kind of understand. The roofer that I worked with gave us diagrams, showed us exactly where they repaired, gave us, reports on the condition of all the roofs. That stuff is gold, especially if you're batting wind, hail deductibles, specifically in the Midwest. And the last is parking lots. Parking lots can be more of a liability hazard, especially if you have third parties on site. But parking lot maintenance is indicative, and it's something that an underwriter is going to look at that's going to be a testament to how much kind of care of the location that your client might have. So all of these things should be part of that construction. It's not a huge list. It starts with just using the right language with your underwriter. Moving on, that was C. Now we're going to O, occupancy. What is the occupancy? Occupancy is going to be the easiest one. It's what does your client actually do? What's going on inside the walls that you're trying to insure? Are you running a meth lab, or are you woodworking, or are you making steel widgets? What's the occupancy? And the occupancy typically is not going to be 100% one thing. So if there is more than 20% of the building that's dedicated to office, you probably need to call that out. If it's just a 5% office and they've got one office for the plant manager, probably don't worry about it. But what's the occupancy and what's the percent breakdown? You don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to have an exact number, but just ballpark it. A lot of buildings weren't built for purpose. So if your building was built to suit, meaning your client has, or you as the owner, built it for your needs, that's a huge plus. It gives a lot of underwriters the confidence that this was built with the intention of what's going on inside of it. Therefore, it's safer. It's got the right systems and the right HVAC, the right sprinklers. We'll get to that in a second. So if it wasn't built for purpose, if it's modified, like a lot of our clients operate in, what was there before it? What was being done before it? If they were running a meth lab before, it had great sprinkler protection over and above, or it was built with special eaves to reduce fire suppression or reduce fire loss, what does it matter? What was there before? That should be relatively easy to figure out from the customer. I think that stuff matters. When it also comes to occupancy, especially in the manufacturing space, the one thing that matters on the inside, and I've seen it time and time again, is racking. Clients don't really give a shit about their insurance when they buy racking and when they think about the configuration of racking. And then racking doesn't always mix with sprinkler design. And now you have a loss control representative from your property carrier say, hey, that top row racking is suppressing the sprinklers. This might as well be not sprinklered. And now you have to tell your client that their entire configuration of their warehouse is no longer going to be adequate for the insurance company. So figuring out what the racking is, getting a picture of the racking. Does the racking have slots underneath it for the water to drip down, or is it wood? The racking is probably the most important thing in that when it comes to occupancy outside of whatever they do, whatever they're doing inside of it. Bonus points, and I've talked about this before. If you can get a copy of of a map, a layout, or a diagram where you can write in what each section of the building is doing, bonus points. Underwriters love that. Loss control people are going to need that. Tip that I've given out before: if a client doesn't have one, use the emergency exit diagram that they have legally posted within the facility. Next up, P, protection. Protection is going to come down to sprinklers. That's really what we're talking about here. And this is one where it's a huge deal. And I was guilty of not knowing on clients that were 10 years old, do I have sprinklers? And it's just embarrassing. You're in the business of risk. Sprinklers are a huge issue. So not only should you know what the sprinklers are, but if you're doing like an update or you're gathering information for the first time, is the percentage of the building sprinkler is only the other percentage. Are you operating in a building that was built for purpose, meaning the sprinkler design would, in theory, be designed for what's going on inside the building? Or did I inherit a building that used to be a meth lab and now I'm, doing steel manufacturing? Allow the underwriter to say, hey, what was here before probably required a more robust system than what's going on here today. So I can at least assume that we're okay. Or is it the other way? It's unsprinklered, or maybe it was sprinklered for steel manufacturing with no storage, and now I'm doing woodworking. Knowing those without having a sprinkler analysis can give you an idea of what you're going to find out about the adequacy of the sprinkler. If you're going on a loss control visit, or if your carrier is going on a loss control visit, or a member of your team is going on a loss control visit, there are like 3 or 4 things that it's nice to have pictures. I used to try to build files. You want a picture of the sheet that says the components, how much water is coming out of the head, a picture of the head itself. This is all in the sprinkler room. Snap pictures in the sprinkler room and keep it on file. You're going to have a really good opportunity to know what the design is when it's needed, and you're going to look like you have your shit together. Also, figure out who your client's sprinkler contractor is. A lot of clients sub this out. Another nice trick is to say, hey, Mr. Insurance or Mr. Client, I actually have some questions about the sprinkler. Here's what I'd like to do. Could I give Ahern, or could I give your sprinkler contractor a call? There's no need for you or your building maintenance guy to chase them around. I have some super specific insurance questions. Would it be okay if I entered into a communication directly with them? Happy to do it with an email, and I'll CC whoever you want. Now you're taking ownership of something instead of passing it on just because you think that it's the CFO's job to track down a sprinkler. Fuck no, it's not. Own that. You're capable, you're professional. You are very able to track down sprinkler information from the contractor. I used to love that. I used to feel like I'm taking something off my client's plate. The next is, and we oftentimes didn't have this on our spreadsheets, and I got a story about how this kind of screwed me once. ISO protection classes. I'm looking at something right here. There is 10 ISO protection classes. I think the personal lines folks definitely spend a lot more time on this, because your frame house with no sprinkler system that's insured in the middle of freaking nowhere has got a bigger fire hazard. Commercial buildings, for the most part, aren't going to be out in the middle of nowhere, but it does happen. I had a client warehouse to store some materials. It was unsprinklered, but there was a man-made pond on site with some pump action. So you could pump from this man-made pond to put out a fire. However, it was unsprinkled. We were keeping about $4 million. We did not own the building. And it was in the middle of nowhere, Indiana. Now, the protection class, when you looked, and protection class is easy to find. You should be able to go onto the internet, type in the address, and find the protection class. Now, protection class is somewhat in the eye of the individual underwriting beholder, but you should be able to get a baseline. You're not gonna be scratching your head. Is it a 2 or is it a 10? You might have some differences between the 7 and 8, and that 7 and 8 might be the difference between, yeah, I'll insure this, or no, I won't insure this. So it is something worth looking into. But when you find a high protection class, do some research. So that warehouse that had $4 million of stuff with a man-made pond but no suppression system, I was able to get an insurance company to feel more comfortable with this risk, because I actually literally mapped out. I said, look, there's water here to put out a fire. There's a pump from this man-made reservoir to put out the fire. What do we need to put out a fire? Well, we need somebody to do it. And so while the protection class was a 10, we were able to say within a 3-mile radius, there was 1 volunteer fire department and 2 fully staffed fire departments. So yeah, the protection class was high, but we had all the stuff that was needed to put out a suppressive fire. And what doesn't show up in that protection class is that one of those paid fire departments was like 0.2 miles outside of what the protection class rating would consider close enough. And once we were able to do that, we went from having no insurance carriers to an insurance carrier. And all it took was me taking Google Maps and saying, search nearby for fire departments. So look at the ISO protection class, get ahead of the things where it's going to be a high number and going to be a problem. And exposure. That's the E in COPE. I'll be honest with you. Up until I started researching this podcast, which I did for about half an hour, I've been putting exposure down wrong, and I've never been called on it. But for the purpose of accuracy, I'm not sure this is the most important category in COPE, but I thought exposure was like the same as occupancy. Like, what are we doing inside of it? So, like, I would have metal stamping, and then I would have occupancy, and then I would have exposure, manufacturing, and metal stamping. That's not technically what it means according to ISO. It actually is your requirement or the ask of you to fill out your COPE to say, what are my reasonable exposures within the area? Am I next to the meth lab? Is my neighbor, doing this? Do I have limited egress? It's exposure is what outside forces outside of the building that we're insuring would play into what we might have going on for the risk of loss. And so I've never had a question, and I think I was doing this wrong for a really long time. So I'm guessing this is the least important of the four. But nonetheless, as I wrap this up, COPE is a fundamental part of property insurance. Take it a little bit seriously. And if you're like me, you had clients with perfect COPE information because you had your shit together when you started working with them. And then you have some that you're embarrassed that you don't know. So whether or not it's, hey, we're running a special project this year to make sure our COPE is up to snuff, find a way to spend a little bit of time on this, harness some of the readily available information like AI and like some of the internet tools to fill in the blanks where you don't have to necessarily go back to your client. But make sure your COPE information is right. This is a soft market. This is a year for you to claw back some rate and improve your terms.